Ladies and gentlemen, the United States and the Republic of Korea face numerous foreign policy and security challenges that will demand the closest possible coordination in the months to come. None will be greater than dealing with the disturbing reality of a permanently nuclear-armed North Korea. Decades of efforts by Washington and Seoul to prevent North Korea from acquiring nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them have failed. We now face the nightmare we long sought to avoid: a North Korea that possesses a credible nuclear weapons capability that the regime in Pyongyang is determined never to give up. To prevent this situation from arising, over the years, the United States and the Republic of Korea pursued policies that ran the gamut from concessionary and appeasement-oriented to hardline and confrontational. All of these policies failed. Sanctions were applied or ramped up, and sanctions were eased or removed. Those approaches also failed. We both isolated North Korea and then sought to bring it into the community of nations. We offered security assurances and the normalization of relations, thinking this was what Pyongyang wanted. And we also threatened regime change and military action, believing this would bring the regime to its knees. We offered food aid, energy assistance, infrastructure projects, and visions of economic modernization and development to the North Korean regime. Former President Trump's famous slideshow at the Singapore summit sought to dazzle Kim Jong-un with promises of a bright economic future. And former President Moon's discussions with Kim Jong-un focused on common prosperity and cooperation. None of these efforts, nor the harsher approaches occasionally pursued by Seoul and Washington, had any effect on North Korea's relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. In fact, the DPRK only accelerated its pursuit of nuclear weapons, expanded its arsenal, and ramped up its ballistic missile testing program to an unprecedented degree, regardless of the efforts of the Republic of Korea and the United States. I say this not to criticize the efforts made by every previous U.S. and ROK administration to resolve the North Korea nuclear issue. My point is that the reason we now face a nuclear-armed North Korea is not because of the lack of effort, nor the absence of sincerity and wisdom as we pursued both hard or soft approaches over the years. Rather, the reason we are facing a nuclear-armed and almost certainly a permanently nuclear-armed North Korea today is that this is what Pyongyang has always wanted and what it has been determined to achieve, regardless of the sacrifices required to achieve it. Pyongyang has reached its goal of becoming a de facto nuclear power. A decade ago, then North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho told a gathering of U.S. experts and former officials in New York City that North Korea would not consider denuclearizing until the United States removed its threat. That was the word that he used. He defined the threat as the existence of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, the presence of U.S. troops in the Republic of Korea, and the U.S. nuclear umbrella that protected South Korea and Japan. If you remove the threat, he said, we will feel more secure, and in 10 or 20 years, he said, we will be able to consider denuclearization. He declared, in the meantime, we can sit down and engage in arms control talks as one nuclear power with another. In those remarkably frank comments, Foreign Minister Ri made clear that the price the United States and South Korea would have to pay for possible denuclearization was the end of the bilateral alliance, the departure of U.S. forces from Korea, and the end of the United States security guarantee to the Republic of Korea. Ri Yong-ho surely knew these things were impossible, but in an important sense, what he was really telling us was that North Korea intended to remain a nuclear power long into the future, and that it would seek U.S. acceptance of this new reality by getting the United States to engage in so-called arms control talks. He was telling us that Pyongyang was now a member of the nuclear club and wanted to be treated as such. Experts have long believed that North Korea's goals were to use the possession of nuclear weapons to guarantee the survival of the regime. If anything, this grossly understates the utility of nuclear weapons as North Korea sees them. For Pyongyang, possession of nuclear weapons puts the regime on a par with the United States and gives the DPRK the ability to create the illusion of being prepared to negotiate away portions of its arsenal or freezes on its arsenal's growth in exchange for the reduction of the U.S. presence in Korea and the unraveling of the U.S.-ROK alliance. But Pyongyang also sees its possession of nuclear weapons as a game changer in its relations with South Korea. If Pyongyang can somehow bring about the reduction in or the end of the U.S. commitment to the Republic of Korea, then a South Korea without a U.S. protective shield will face a nuclear-armed North Korea that is determined to unify the Korean Peninsula under its rule. Pyongyang thinks it knows how this will end. Today, the Pyongyang regime has most of the trappings of a full-fledged nuclear state. It has nuclear and thermonuclear weapons. It possesses short, medium, and long-range ballistic missiles. And the DPRK has both uranium and plutonium production facilities. Pyongyang may be willing to dangle negotiations about freezes or caps on some of these capabilities, but it surely has no intention of giving them up. Now, North Korea is also telling us how it plans to use the new capabilities and technologies it has developed. In recent weeks, Kim Yo-jong and Kim Jong-un have each introduced us to Pyongyang's emerging nuclear doctrine. The doctrine calls for the preemptive use of nuclear weapons, including against the Republic of Korea. For many years, many people in South Korea opined that North Korea would never use nuclear weapons against fellow Koreans. Ladies and gentlemen, Kim Yo-jong and Kim Jong-un have made clear that they are prepared to do exactly this. Kim Jong-un has publicly and explicitly committed his country to the expansion and enhancement of his missile and nuclear arsenals. He has made this a central pillar of national policy. His experts, technicians, and engineers are following his orders to the letter. The developments we have witnessed in these programs over the past 2 or 3 years are truly remarkable. Soon, perhaps very soon, we will see a new North Korean nuclear test. It may even be of a miniaturized warhead that is capable of being fitted on a submarine-launched ballistic missile, or on a MIRVed ICBM, or it could be a tactical warhead capable of being launched on a shorter-range missile. The DPRK is working on developing all of these systems. North Korea's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile developments are not the result of U.S. or ROK policy failures or shortcomings. They are the consequence of a long-standing and carefully crafted North Korean game plan that goes back decades. Today, we are in a new situation when it comes to Pyongyang's nuclear threat. It is clearer than ever that the DPRK intends to remain a nuclear-armed state. Denuclearization, which once seemed to be a realistic policy goal, is today a noble but almost certainly unattainable aspiration. Sadly, denuclearization is almost certainly not going to happen. Today, the central policy question is not what more we must do to get North Korea to denuclearize. It is what to do about the harsh reality we face. The Pyongyang regime has become a nuclear power, and there may be little we can do to reverse that without incurring risk. North Korea has been given summits with Kim Jong-un. It's been offered unilateral concessions and confidence-building measures, the suspension of large-scale bilateral military exercises, security assurances, promises of a peace agreement, and calls for dialogue and reconciliation. It has responded to all of this with an unprecedented and troubling nuclear and missile buildup. It has also responded to the ROK's concessionary approach by destroying the two most important symbols of South-North cooperation, the Kaesong South-North Joint Liaison Office and Mount Kumgang Hotel and Resort Project. And the regime has murdered a South Korean citizen in the West Sea and threatened to use nuclear weapons against South Korea. North Korean hostility is more transparent and palpable than it has ever been. To repeat a point I made earlier, this is not a criticism of the shortcomings of previous ROK policy. It is an affirmation that North Korea continues to follow a path that it set for itself some time ago, and almost nothing that South Korea or the United States can do will deter Pyongyang from pursuing this course. Washington and Seoul must consult thoroughly, frankly, and soon on what to do about Pyongyang's nuclear status. There needs to be a fundamental reassessment of current policy and a cold, dispassionate review of previous and current efforts. After decades of experience, we know what doesn't work. The real question is, what will work? And are we willing to pursue new and perhaps riskier courses of action? Experience tells us that concessions and delusional hopes for reconciliation don't work with North Korea. And experience has also told us that North Korea is prepared to take great risks and make major sacrifices in order to develop and keep its nuclear weapons. Pyongyang sees these weapons as its salvation, as the insurance policy that will guarantee both the survival of the regime and its victory in the struggle for supremacy on the Korean Peninsula. So perhaps it is time to convince Kim Jong-un that the fate of his regime hinges not on having nuclear weapons, but on giving them up. To do that, we must be prepared to demonstrate that we have the will and the means to show Kim Jong-un that his possession of nuclear weapons will only lead to the regime's demise. This is a risky approach, but it is one that directly addresses the central logic behind Kim Jong-un's pursuit of nuclear weapons. It is also an approach that can show Kim how his blind pursuit of those weapons could be his undoing. Do we dare pursue such an approach? With North Korea on track to becoming a permanently nuclear-armed state, can we afford not to? These will be the most important questions that the Biden and Yoon administrations will have to answer in the coming days. Thank you very much.